Welcome to the American Intelligence Media. My name is Thomas Payne, and we'd like to welcome you and John Barnwell, our guest today. John, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
We need your help, as oftentimes is the case. Today you're going to find out that John knows a lot about medicine and chemistry and health and all this stuff. We had so many subscribers ask questions about what to do to antidote 5G that we have produced article after article. And Betsy's out there, I think, pushing out some more articles on it so that you'll have plenty of information on antidotes. So, yes, it's scary what's coming, the next generation of wireless cell phone bombardment with beyond microwaves into what I call milliwaves, or the millimeter range, which is into the gigahertz, hundreds of gigahertz, in fact. So what can we do? Well, we mentioned some things. You can be like John. You can put a Faraday cage around his smart meter. Or you can be like other people I know who take Ormus, or other people who take baths in bentonite clay, or people who eat diatomaceous earth. Or you can put up biogeometry devices. We put a connection there to one of the very best and finest that we have tested. So Betsy's given you some connections there. But when this was all said and done, holy moly, John calls me up and says, why didn't you mention C60? A couple of years ago, he turned me on to it, and I've been taking it, and I think it's really what people advertise it to be. And so he knows a lot about this. So he had a conversation with me yesterday, and I wish I would have recorded it. So John, please, can you tell us why in the world would C60, Buckminster fullerenes, and Shungite, which some say is a meteorite, have anything to do with antidoting the wireless beams that are going through our body that some say are hurting us so much?
Well, it really all orbits around the idea of integrity. And of course, the modern exponent of the concept of harmony and integrity is Buckminster Fuller. And the scientists that were involved in the discovery of C60, which is carbon with 60 atoms formed together in a lattice work that looks like a soccer ball. There's 12 pentagons and 20 hexagons, so that it forms a sphere. And there's other types of what they call fullerenes or fullerites, and C70 and so on and so forth. But we're not getting into those. We're going to get into the C60. What the shaping characteristic of adding the pentagonal shape to the geometry of this hexagonal formation enables it to be a sphere, because it folds in, and you can actually even see that technique in ancient Indian baskets, and you can see examples of it in the drawings of Leonardo da Vinci. So anyways, that's all well and good, and everybody can go out and they can look for the letter C, 60, carbon. And it's a fascinating substance, because there are no toxic levels of C60 taken in the proper way, because we're basically carbon units. We're created out of carbon. And carbon is quite a fascinating substance, in that in forming a C60 molecule, what you have with 60 atoms of carbon all connected together to form that buckyball, as they call it, or it looks just like a modern soccer ball, but it's like a lattice work. And one of its most interesting characteristics is that it can work in harmony with hydrogen. And what that enables it to do, the openings that are in the lattice work allow hydrogen, which wants to hang out with carbon. The hydrogen can enter inside. It can also bond to all the various points that surround the buckyball. And because buckyball is a part of what you really are. It's something that can pass into your system, and it can deal with what is known as oxidative stress. Now, in getting into your question, specifically about all the various radio waves and electrical fields in which we dwell in, and everybody might wonder, well, what role could that play in health? And really, if you look at most degenerative conditions, science now knows that they arise, like inflammation and so forth, causes various conditions, and most what are referred to as diseases should be more properly considered conditions or states of the organism. And due to oxidative stress, you look at like the metal iron, for example. You see iron that it rusts. Well, that's due to the oxidation that's involved. And in oxidation, what happens is you have molecules that are, so to speak, damaged. They're missing electrons, and so they want to go find some more electrons to complete themselves, and they will scavenge them from surrounding substance. Now, when that happens inside your body, that creates damage. There's damage to cell tissue, there's damage to DNA, there's damage to mitochondria, all over the place. It's just going in there, and it's like you're basically rusting. And so the best thing that we can do is try to introduce into our system antioxidants. And it turns out that what we have here with this Buckminster fullerene, the C60 carbon, is basically the best antioxidant that's been found so far. And it's like way, way beyond many of the antioxidants that one might use in taking various products. Although I would say don't stop taking those things, but it's just another one you can add. It was kind of an accident, the way in which this property of C60 was discovered. And it's, perhaps if I give you a little background as a way to think about this.
Well, John, what you're saying is you can take this substance and it can help the oxidative stress in your entire system from these beams going through your body. Like the poor people who are going to be at the Super Bowl, they have 1,200 5G antennas, and they're right in their handrails, so they're sitting right next to them. So everyone at the Super Bowl is going to be irradiated as an experiment to see what can happen. That type of basically what they call full spectrum radiation, you can do anything with, but one thing is for sure, if you get that close to it, it is not good for your health. So if people had taken C60 before they went, would that have helped antidote the exposure they were going to get today if they went there?
Well, the indications that have been coming out from the research that scientists are doing, for example, they did an experiment with rats, and they exposed rats to the lethal levels of radiation. And they had a controlled group that was given nothing, and then they had the group that was given the C60. And the group that was given the C60 experienced no ill effects. So that's a fine example, because basically what radiation does is it kind of goes into your system and disrupts you on an atomic level, which is like the action of an antioxidant, in that it's destroying the discrete structure of your integrity within your virtual atomic structure, the web of your being. And so really when you're looking at C60, it's quite fascinating, because they named it after Buckminster Fuller. And he's quite a genius. I consider him, in a way, perhaps even more important than Albert Einstein. But the fact that out of all the books that our Buckminster Fuller has written, only one or two of them are in print at the present time. So that just shows you how science often misses the boat when things come along, and that Buckminster Fuller perhaps is more of a scientist for the future. But
Well, John, also, doesn't C60 extend life like they did experiments on rats and they live 3 times as long as they usually do? And isn't that what many people say it also does? Because when you get rid of this stress on your system, it basically gives you the capacity to live longer, I guess.
Well, yeah, basically, to give you a little introduction into it, there was a scientist, an Algerian scientist who was working at a French university, and C60 is normally used as a lubricant. It's an excellent lubricant. You can think of it as like nano ball bearings, in that they're little ball-like things that are one of the strongest substances known to man, and so they use it as a lubricant in industry, and that's its most common practical use. So when they use substances like that, they always want to do a test, and to find the lethal dose. It's called the LD50. And so he was given the job of working on this. And so he took laboratory rats. Laboratory rats normally have a lifespan of 2 years. And so he, in order to get the C60 into the rats, it won't dissolve in water. So he dissolved it in olive oil and was able to mix it in olive oil. And he started giving the C60 to the rats. And lo and behold, there was like a 92% increase in the lifespan of the rats in the first trial that he did, which was entirely unexpected. And there was no complications whatsoever. See, rats are different from human beings. Human beings at the end of their chromosomes have what are called telomeres. And telomeres are like little caps that are on the ends of your chromosomes. They're like the little caps on the ends of your shoelaces. And every time that a cell replicates, a certain amount of the telomeres is subtracted. And then when the telomeres run out, you're all done. That cell can't reproduce anymore. And what is interesting about rats is they don't have telomeres on the ends of their chromosomes. So they end up dying from oxidative stress eventually. And so any really old 2-year-old rat's going to be full of like tumors and so on and so forth because they've gone so far into oxidative stress. Well, he had these rats going, and finally at the end of after 6 years, with some of them, he just ended up cutting them open. He had to end their life. So in that experiment, he really didn't find out what their lifespan was as a result because he wanted to get paid. So it gives you an idea of something, how intriguing this is. And it's so new because it's something that really only came on the scene. I mean, there's experiments being done with this, but scientists tend to do experiments on things that they can patent, and you can't patent an element of the periodic table, so they have to figure out some form in which they can combine it and patent it, and mixing it with whatever oil you want that's an edible oil will do just fine. You can mix it with olive oil, you can mix it with almond oil, you can mix it with avocado oil. It depends on what oil you can deal with personally. One consideration that you must keep in mind is you don't want to expose it to any light as little as possible, because that's going to degrade its ability. And you want to be careful in combining it with any medication you might be taking, because it may enhance the effect of the medication, or it may cause that medication to be neutralized. It's so good at scavenging toxins out of the body. You take the C60 in, and then the oil causes it to go into the liver, and from the liver it's distributed throughout the body. It can even pass the brain-blood barrier and go into the brain. So people are noticing that brain fog is going away. There's this one NASA scientist whose mother was in her 90s, and he thought, what can I lose? He says, I'll take it because I wouldn't give my mother anything that I wouldn't take myself. And so he starts giving it to his mother, who he used to help around because she was losing her sight. And so he put her on the C60, and after a while, her vision cleared up and she became spry, and she ended up getting her driver's license back. And so this is really, really an important thing that's going on here.
Well, John, your descriptions remind me of Ormus. This substance that you take that has something to do with the higher metals in the brain that cause hyperconnectivity, superconnectivity with everything in nature. So the C60 and the carbon you're describing is what philosophers have called the Holy Grail, really, or the thing that keeps it all together. And as we know, from carbon comes all life. And so if you talk about any organic thing going on in nature, it's because carbon has selflessly given up of itself to make connections. But now, is that type of connectivity the same type of connectivity that comes from Ormus? Because I also understand taking Ormus not only puts your brain into gamma waves, which then causes all the other waves to work much, much better, but that it also extends your life and causes the deposits of the proper crystals and the pineal gland and all that. So is there any connection between C60 and Ormus, since they both do help with 5G and the antidote for that?
Yeah, there's really only anecdotal information about that, because any experimental work has not really been done. But I would assume that would be the case. Yeah, but in a very different manner, because see, when you're talking about Ormus, which is your platinum group metals in monatomic form, for example, brain tissue. If it's gone through a burn and broken down in a chemical laboratory, and the proper long enough of a burn, it was discovered by the Russians that the brain substance was 10 to 15% rhodium and iridium, but in a monatomic form. And so what you have there is the superconductors, which is iridium and rhodium in a monatomic form, that are actually superconductors at room temperature, which is highly unusual. And we could do a whole presentation on Ormus, and I think we should, because it's one of the more fascinating subjects. There's been instances of finding this in Flinders Petrie found the white powder of Ormus. It was believed, although it's since lost, but in one of the temples in the Middle East. So it's not something that's new. It's something that's been used quite a few different ancient peoples, and there's also foods that are high in their auric or Ormus content, like aloe vera is very high in Ormus. Also Concord grape, which is interesting because when I was a young child, I always had such a craving for Concord grape juice. And in fact, when I was a child, I always insisted on burnt toast. And whenever you burn your toast, you create a certain amount of Ormus. And there was a scientist who noticed that the monkeys in Madagascar would come and steal the charcoal from the fire and eat it. And so they have a natural tendency to want to bring about the detoxification that comes by associating with carbon in the charcoal form, which does have a certain amount of C60. But I recommend anybody who's listening to this to just go look on charcoal, like activated charcoal, as a form of detoxification. Anything that you can do regarding detoxification is going to help you deal with all of these electro waves, microwaves, and all that they're continually bombarding us with. But I think that there's a pairing of C60 and the Ormus. See, with C60, I see it more on the level of the indications are that it helps to reestablish homeostasis. See, what happens with Ormus is when you take it, it's a good idea to like eat an apple or drink some kefir. These things can contribute hydrogen. And it's the hydrogen that wants to pair up with the C60. And so the C60 is able to take this hydrogen and bring it into the cell or beyond the blood-brain barrier. And through that, be able to neutralize the oxidative stress. And it even, the C60 can array itself around the mitochondria, which is the source of the energy in the cell that's producing the ATP, which is the energy that drives the cell. Whereas there's also an element that takes place in regards to the high-level communication that takes place through the presence of platinum group metals. So I think they go hand in hand. Yes, absolutely. Although this is only anecdotal because these things are not available to be used in the pharmacopoeia of the pharmaceutical industry, because they only work on things they can make money on. So there's not going to make any money because the Ormus was created with an open patent to prevent that from happening, and then the C60 is just an element of the periodic table, and so there's no patent on that either. But if you get into understanding what takes place on a level of understanding, you have to be able to bring yourself into looking at. There are certain things that pertain to substance, and then there are other things that pertain to form, and it's the form aspect of C60 or the form aspect of your Ormus, which is monatomic, meaning like they consider monatomic generally to be smaller than 5 atoms involved, but it's in the general range, 5 to 15 atoms in a molecule, and then with the a C60, you've got 60, but it's very, very minute. I mean, it would take 100,000 C60 Buckyballs to bring about the width of a human hair, for example. So they're absolutely nanoparticles, and they also have a certain conductivity that enables them to function on an electrical level, as does graphite. Some of the other forms of carbon, if they are created in a form like the lattice work of graphite, or a diamond is not conductive because it doesn't have any electrons it can donate.
Well, that brings up the next topic, which is Shungite. But first, let me just say, when you told me years ago about Ormus, and my alchemist started making it for me, and I started taking it, I was so shocked, because we were working on a concept of how is it that we can have all these children that I worked with get exposed to a resonant frequency of the gamma wave in brain waves. And so we figured something out called the cube, and we figured some other things out, but you had turned us on to the fact that Ormus, you can put it under your tongue and the same thing happens. So we went and we looked at the research, and the research done in Switzerland is quite conclusive. When you put Ormus in your mouth, it causes your brain waves to go into harmony like no other time, probably. You can't do that yourself, basically. So when we're talking about this hyperconnectivity and the superconductivity and resonance factors of the electrical potential of carbon, graphite also, as you just mentioned, and the electrical potential of Ormus, since it changes the electrical potential of brain waves, then surely this is proof that bringing the body into a coherent brain wave, or a coherent wave, a coherent frequency, could easily be the antidote to the heterodyned billions of frequency running through your body, creating complete static chaos. But if you could take a substance like Ormus, which I do every day, put it on your tongue, and then for a few minutes, for 20 minutes, you go into a super learning state. That they learned this by working with children with ADHD, ADD, children who had Down syndrome, and children who had all kinds of special needs. And what it did is, for a short period of time, and then that period could linger for quite a while if you didn't disturb it, you could simply take Ormus, and it would do that for you. You could change your brain waves. So that proves the connectivity. Now, the next topic is Shungite, which you reminded me when you called to tell me about C60, about Shungite, because I had remembered this old story, a legend. I don't know if either of these stories is actually quite accurate, but Pat Flanagan years ago went to the Hunza Valley, and he tested the water there because the people supposedly lived to be 125 years old until the Western culture came in and created the Shambhala Hotel in the Hunza Valley. And then in the Gilgit Valley and the other valleys near there, he tested the water, and the people lived for a long time. He figured he'd figure out what it was. So what was it, John? It was gallium or some other substance. But supposedly, there's a legend, I don't know if it's true, you can confirm it or not for us, John, that Buckminster Fuller went on a search like that himself because he was looking for, this optimum way so that, oxidative stress, as you call it, which is exactly what it is, wouldn't kill people, that they could stay alive longer. So he found this Shungite substance. But Shungite appears in different places in the world, but it appears particularly in Shunga, Russia, where these mines are, and you can get this stone, and it has amazing qualities to those of us who are sensitive, and what it can do is they have 100 devices that if you have this on you, near you, in your house, whatever, it will cause coherent energy to be made out of all the electromagnetic bombardment. And so I've had it for years, but when John brought it to mind, we got out all that we had and went and got some more, and we're now doing some more experiments with it because I knew that meteorites diffuse this energy if you have the meteorite touching your body, if it's a iron meteorite. But Shungite seems to be a meteorite that was a chondrite, which when it was going through space, the carbon in it, because of the activity that was in space, the cosmic radiation, caused the carbon to turn into some kind of special condition, what I guess we're going to call C60 or something like that. And so Shungite has somehow C60 in it. And if you keep it near you, you can take it as a substance that you could drink, C60, and you can get it by simply having this stuff near you. Now, there's legends that people take pieces of it, put it in their water, they drink it, and they live to be, very old. So, John, can you clear that up for us? Because there are other substances that have been supposedly able to cause longevity and long life. Does C60 have something to do with that? And tell us about Shungite, because that is an absolutely amazing story, because you and I also realized how this arose in literature, though we're not going to talk about it on this show. So, John, Shungite, can you clarify that for us, especially how it can stop 4G and 5G radiation?
Okay, well, Shungite's a fascinating topic in and of itself. It's really gained its popularity in the mid 1800s. The Tsar at that time, he created a spa in the waters where there was coming through a Shungite deposit. And there's been a lot of mining of Shungite. I've been into Shungite for some time. In fact, when I became interested in Shungite, I had to order it from Russia. Just like when I became interested in the C60 years ago, I had to order it from Hungary. It wasn't even available from the U.S. But your Shungite, though, it's again, although it does have C60 molecules present in it, and Shungite is a carbon rock, and there are different levels of luster of Shungite, but it's really a good thing to have around for neutralizing the ill effects of radiation, so on and so forth. But it's only, maybe 2 to 3% C60. So a more profound effect can be gotten by actually drinking the C60 in oil. But a lot of the population, peasants and all that, they would take Shungite stones and put it in their bucket of their drinking water. And they felt that it had wonderful therapeutic properties. As far as the Hunzer is concerned, they also, their water came through a Shungite deposit, and so there is that element. But there's also the element, I did a recording a while ago of a little-known topic of the polarity of temperature that creates a regeneration and relaxing of the spiral form DNA that people can dig up. I don't want to get into that here, but that was also present in the Hunza Valley because they have a giant glacier at the top of the valley, and then the sun was so strong, so they're continually being swathed in the polarity of cold and hot simultaneously. Just like the miners in Colorado, they would sit around their campfires. It's like, geez, 10, 20 below zero, you're sitting around your campfire, you got the heat in the front and the cold behind you, and that creates a polarity that enables a relaxing of the DNA spiral, which these miners, even though they lived off of bacon and eggs pretty much, they're some of the longest lived Americans that are on record. And so it wasn't a dietary thing, it was an environmental thing. Although we don't know if they were exposed to the charcoal in their water supply. It's funny because the Shungite, these deposits, while a lot of people were considering them to be something that comes from meteorites, really you have to look at the total content of carbon on the Earth as being from extra earthly origin, and that carbon is something that's produced in red giant carbon stars, and as they go through their extreme chemical reaction, they cause a combination of elements that are pressed together, and they produce what we know as carbon. According to physicists like Stephen Hawking, he said that when the Big Bang first occurred, there wasn't any carbon. Carbon came along later. And whether or not you agree with him is, that gets kind of far afield. But nonetheless, it's something that we know from spectroscopic analysis that carbon is something that's present all throughout the space. And you could see that it's being emitted by these super red giant stars, carbon stars. And so it's something that has come to Earth over the millions of years and billions of years or what have you. And so it's something that's visited us from space, which is quite fascinating because all life on Earth is we know it, is carbon-based. We can speculate that there might be silica-based life systems on other planets or something like that, but that's at this point speculation. Right now, the only silica-based component in our evolution that's dynamic is this whole electrical grid that we're struggling with. And so it becomes a question of, can we as silicon-based technologists come to terms with our carbon biological unit and bring it into a harmonious relationship. And the problem is your silicon scientists, all your Ray Kurzweils and all that, they happen to think that they can transfer their consciousness into a silicon-based system. And I say, well, good luck with that.
Exactly. I don't think they'll ever be able to quite do that. But now you're talking some spacey stuff, so I'm going to go out there and I'm going to mention something very spacey. You're talking about C60 floating around out there in space. Well, C60 is directly connected to human beings in a way that you're explaining that shows that it's kind of like the next step for human beings. Well, we researched years ago, as I'm sure you remember as a Monastic Club member, galactose. And we found that It is true that in space, floating in these clouds of ethanol, being perfectly preserved, is galactose. The only thing on the Earth close to it is mother's milk. It is perfect DNA, basically. It's the perfect sugar. It's the perfect DNA. And so out there is floating around the DNA that they say, when our system went through it, seeded our Earth with the DNA that we need. And it's still a perfect DNA, by the way. So now you're saying C60 is out there. So what is C60? Has C60 evolved out there from carbon coming out of these red giants into C60? Because there's also C70, C80, C80 with hydrogen and oxygen. So what is this? What is this evolution of carbon? And one other thing, Shungite can be put in an electrical circuit. And as soon as it's put in that circuit, it harmonizes the circuit, makes it more coherent and more efficient. So you can put these things directly into the circuit of your, say, your refrigerator or other electrical devices. And once you put it in the circuit, it actually causes a more efficient functioning. Now, if you put it on your skin and you hold two pieces in your hand, wouldn't this go through your body and harmonize the energy, the bioelectric energy of your body? So what is this magic of this seemingly evolving carbon? And how is it that it's one of the only substances that is not metallic that is so conductive? Matter of fact, you could call it beyond conductive, hyperconductive. You could call it superconductive. You could call it harmonizing. I call it cohering, because what you want in any signal is for all the static electricity, the static, to drop and have a clear signal. So it seems that is exactly what Shungite does. Is that true, John?
Well, I think that you're touching on something there. Again, when you approached me about having this conversation, rather than spending a lot of time looking into people that were trying to work with the C60, although I've always done a lot of that since I found out about it, but I went back to Buckminster Fuller, that I used to read a lot back in the 70s, 60s into the 70s and all of that. And his whole idea of integrity, that's what we're looking at. It's how can we remain integral beings. You know, he considered that it's not that I think, therefore I am. It's that I am, therefore I have integrity. That we are integrated beings, and we are integrated with each other. And but the greater that we can manifest our individualized nature, the greater we're going to be able to contribute to the wholeness. And so consequently, if you look in the social sphere, there's all these systems that are trying to impose themselves on us as authoritarian, and they're centralized. Well, a centralized system is entirely against the grain when it comes to the natural order of things, because the natural order itself is entirely decentralized, and it's cooperative through decentralization. It's not an imposition of order from outside, some quasi new technocratic order. That's a system of death. That's a system of entropy. That's a system of fear that's going to grind itself down and eventually exhaust itself. Buckminster Fuller himself said, truth is cosmically total, synergistic. Verities are generalized principles stated in semi-metaphorical terms. Verities are differentiable, but love is omni-embracing, omni-coherent, omni-inclusive. With no exceptions, love, like synergetics, is non-differentiatable, i.e. is integral. And so you have to work with a higher ordering system to be able to move into this new view of the world. But it's not entirely new, because Plato said God, geometrizes. And so it's the form that we have to come to terms with. And so much of modern science is based on substance, whereas form you could see as geometry, substance you could see as arithmetical, or all of that, like, so on the one side you have Einstein with his algebraic notation, and on the other side you have Buckminster Fuller with his geometric forms trying to create harmonious space.
And we know carbon is love, and so what you're basically saying is when you look at the particular yourself and the general, the 4G, 5G raying at you, it has to do with your integral relationship with the world. So if you're taking C60 or Ormus, or you built a Faraday cage around your house or whatever, it's your individual relationship to how you're going to handle that and your own integrity in relationship to that. Is that what you're saying, John?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. It's what our Buckminster Fuller would call a radiant nonlinear epistemology. And so epistemology is that's concerned with what is your theory of knowledge? How do you work within the world based on knowledge? And it's he's famous for making the statement that a caterpillar has no idea about becoming a butterfly. There's nothing in a caterpillar that tells you it's going to be a butterfly, is the actual quote. So what we have to do is be able to understand the principle of synergetics, and that's not in the sense so much of what's coming through in people that are trying to discern the teachings of the secret and the psi seminars and all that. They're doing whatever they're doing. Our Buckminster Fuller was way ahead of them. And so consequently, just in looking in simple things, you can't necessarily find a simple answer, because you could take sodium and you could take chloride, okay? Well, sodium is explosive, and chlorine is a noxious gas, and you combine them together and you get sodium chloride, which is salt, which is wonderful. So things are not necessarily what you think they may be, and you have to enter into things on a level of personal experience. And it behooves one to come to terms with these things and start to enter into perhaps even a meditative state about your different geometrical forms, what are known as the Platonic solids, to be able to try and find a harmonious space for your consciousness to dwell in, instead of being stuck in all this linear thinking that's just, like the computers, there's 0.0.0. I mean, there's much more to it. It's the framework in which we live that makes us healthy. The substances only become a problem when they become out of balance. And any substance that is in nature, except with perhaps the exception of carbon, and all substances are poisons. And so it has to do with the form in which we associate with these things. And so in working with form, we can bring about a harmonious relationship.
Well, John, you've nailed it. I was going to just try to be smarter than you and mention that it's about consciousness, but you beat me to it. And that's what we always come down to at the end. It's you can walk over coals of fire. You can stand in front of 5G, but if you have the antidote, then it doesn't affect you. So it's about consciousness in all of these things. So what we brought to you today is a fuller explanation of why C60 or Shungite would help with 4G, 5G, or all of these other things that we've mentioned. But what John has pointed out is you have to figure out what's going to work for you, really. It's about your own consciousness and how you relate to it and how you integrate with it. John, once again, you never fail to amaze us with what it is you have in your bag of wisdom there. So thanks for talking to us about this. We may have a talk about Ormus since you mentioned it, and I think our listeners are probably going to ask, can you please tell us about Ormus if it's one of these magical substances too? So thank you so much, John, in the fight against 4G, 5G, and helping people come to their own integral relationship to the
And thank you. And I guess I should end with a quote by our Buckminster Fuller. Integrity is the essence of everything successful.